Good evening and welcome to Editor's Lounge. My name is Terrence Kern and I am happy to present this great panel. But before I get into that, there's a few things. I'd like to thank KeyCode because they provide this facility for us to do these events, and without their help, we wouldn't be able to. KeyCode does basically everything from you need to buy a graphics card or some software all the way up to you need to design and equip and completely build out a studio or something. So that's KeyCode. My company is Alpha Dogs. We're primarily a finishing house, so we do color correction, audio mixing, graphics, design, etc. We also have offline rentals. And let's see, who am I going to thank today? I'm thanking the Alpha Dogs crew who's helping out tonight. So thank you, Alpha Dogs people. Also thanking KeyCode again, and especially Michael Kamas, who takes care of all the technical stuff and keeps us on track. I want to thank Greg Huson from Secret HQ for loaning some of his cameras to us for shooting tonight. Thank you, Greg. Okay, and a little bit about Editor's Lounge. For any of you who've never been here before, we're coming up on 15 years of doing Editor's Lounges. And it's just started as an idea of a place for editors to get together and share tips and tricks, network, etc. And it's kind of blossomed out into what we have right here. The original idea was to keep it very non-platform specific, because back then there were, there was an average user group and a Final Cut user group, etc. So this is just purely for editors who want to know about editing and what, the actual skill. So with that all said, I'm going to introduce a great panel back here. The accumulated, I was adding it up earlier today.
No, don't do that.
Way over. There's way over 100 years of experience back here, and that's just Norm. So I really want to thank them because they're all taking their time to come and brave being up here. Editors are generally introverts, so it's really hard to be up in front of a crowd. And the fact that they'll come and do this to help share with all the rest of us is really impressive. So without any further ado, I will now introduce Norm, who's going to take it away.
Hey, thank you, Terry. Thanks so much. What's that, Terry? What's that?
I forgot to say.
I love it. First disaster is when someone slates in the middle of a take. Way to go. Okay. Thank you. So yeah, my name's Norman Hollyn. I'm a professor at the USC Film School. I'm an editor, writer, and occasionally I drink beer. So I'm hoping to do most of that tonight. So first thing in terms of thank you, I want to thank all of you here tonight because it's a Friday night, which means you could be doing lots of other things. So thank you for coming and sharing this with us. Editors don't talk to each other enough. So I really think this is a great way to learn from each other. So thank our panel and thank you very much. I'm hoping there's a camera trained on you so we can actually see you. So thank you. So tonight's panel is called When Disaster Strikes. In a couple of minutes, I'll talk about what I think that means, and panelists may disagree, and I hope they do. But first, I'd like to introduce the panelists. So in order to make sure I get it right, I'll read this. So this is Jennifer Fah-Vayhinger. Whitney Dunn, Sidney Wolinsky, and next to him
It's the first disaster.
is our stuck in LA traffic editor, Harry Miller III. So this is a panel. What I'd like you to do first is just give me 2 or 3 or 1 or 0 of your favorite projects that you've worked on, so the audience both here as well as out there in interwebs land can know who you are. So.
I started working in television. My first show was The Jenny Jones Show in Chicago in the year 2000. And I moved out to LA in 2004, and I've worked on many different projects out here. Currently, I started a little over 5 years ago working on The Price is Right. And that's where I'm currently.
Okay, which is a daily show with, how shall I put this? Horrible deadlines.
Yeah, it can vary from, today I worked on one show I worked on today airs in December and the other one airs next week. So it really varies.
Okay, so I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah.
with disaster. Whitney?
So I've been editing almost 15 years now. And I primarily edit reality and indie films on the side. And I've edited everything from game shows to competition shows to docuseries. I'm currently on a true crime show, which I just won an Emmy for.
Yeah.
And I'm also on a daily show, which, yes, has disasters on a daily basis.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Sidney?
I've been doing this a long time.
So that's where the other 100 years comes.
Yeah, apparently. The show I worked on the longest, I guess, was The Sopranos, which I really enjoyed. I was on the first season of House of Cards, and I just finished a film called The Shape of Water, which is coming out in December. It's a Guillermo del Toro film. And that was the last thing I did, and I'm just looking for my next job.
This is a good place for that. And Harry also has a lot of feature experience as well as long-form TV. So I think that we had, and my experience is in sort of everything. Right? He just couldn't hold a job. So I have features, TV, music videos, episodic, all of that. So we've got a lot of different kinds of experiences here in addition to a lot of years worth of experience. So hopefully all of that comes in. And one of the reasons why I really like the idea of this panel is because whenever you read interviews with editors, everything is just so amazingly wonderful. They got along with all the people who they worked with. The producers and directors were like staggering. It's like no problem at all. Their deadlines, the footage was awesome. Every acting performance was unbelievable, top-notch shape. The NLE never crashed, right? No, wait, I never have heard that. I've never seen that. But we all know from standing around and talking to other editors that that's not really the case. Lots of times things are wonderful. Sometimes they're not. It does not stop the fact that we still enjoy what we're doing. So I'm not saying anything about that. What I'm saying is there are obstacles that we have to overcome constantly in order to do what we do. So I've asked the panel to sort of start thinking about different problems that they find constantly or periodically in their work, but also what they learned from them and how they were able to beat them and maybe even correct process after that, so they wouldn't happen again and again and again and again. And I sort of broke it down into 4 categories to make it easier to digest. So here are my 4 categories. The general category of the problems that I've seen, the categories, have to do with deadline problems. And by the way, that includes people who you work with who might not respect the deadlines. Personnel problems. So that has to do with anyone who you work with. Hire the wrong assistant. Should have never taken this job, that kind of stuff. Equipment problems, because we usually think of that when we think of disasters. So that's easiest. And then I also wanted to talk about, and this may be one of the more important ones, I'm not sure, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, are material and script problems. So at least for us in scripted, there are some things that are just baked into the script. No matter how much you wish they weren't there, are still there, and then you have to deal with them. So for me, those are the 4 general categories that we can shove all of our issues and problems into. So I was just wondering if we could first start, and I want this to be a conversation among all 5 of us, with our silent partner there. So, maybe Jennifer, you could just sort of start out by telling us, have you dealt with all 4, 3 out of the 4, 2 out of the 4, none of them?
Everything's been perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Never, don't know what you're talking about.
Shortest panel ever.
Yeah, I think that I can probably think of at least one example for just about every one of those categories. And some of them, the same example would fit 3 or 4 of the categories.
So why don't we
most of the problems that I could think of happened during pilots. Because
Why is that?
I think it's because there's so much pressure put on the producers because they have to come up with a pilot that somebody's going to want to buy. And so they are under more pressure to put out a product that people are going to enjoy, so then they pass that down to you. Like one pilot I worked on, it was for a talk show, and like the whole thing was a nightmare from start to finish from the production side. But one thing that happened during production that, you know, is one of the things you can't fix in post is they had, I think it was 5 cameras and 6 decks, which you would think not a problem. You know, you have a line cut, 5 ISOs. Well, they chose to do a line cut with graphics and a clean line cut and 4 ISO camera decks, which which meant that they had somebody going, okay, well, we have this jib shot that we're probably only going to use for bumpers. So we'll have somebody changing one of the record decks between the jib shot and our cover shot. So at any point during the show, we only had either the jib shot or the wide shot, but never both unless one of them happened to be on the line cut at the time.
Well, this falls in the inadequate coverage kind of.
Yeah, and then it kind of went even deeper in when they digitized the tapes, the assistant editor got them mixed up and digitized the same tape twice, but named it something, you know, so they had like ISO 1 tape digitized twice, but named it ISO 2 the second time. So that one, so they had to go back and re-digitize everything and regroup it and all this. But the executives at the network knew that this had happened. So that was in their mind that, oh, well, when you say you don't have that shot, it's just because it's the wrong tape. And we know we shot this. So I would go in and I would put this edit, I would get notes, and the note would say, we want to see the jib shot here. I would send back a reply saying, we don't have the jib shot here. And they would go, check the tapes. And it got to the point where I had locators and my entire sequence saying, we don't have the jib here, we don't have the jib here, we don't have the jib here. And every time I would get notes back from the same exact spots, we want to see the jib or we want to see the wide, whichever tape we didn't have. And that wasn't enough for them. So they sent the network executives to sit in the edit bay with me and check the tapes. Or like every time we would go through and we screen the show and they would have me stop at the end of every act and go, okay, go back to here and we want to see the jib here. And I go, well, I have a locator here, we don't have the jib here. Well, can you check your ISO? So I would pull up every ISO and show them, no, we do not have the jib shot here. And they go, well, we need to check the tapes. So every time, the same spot in the show, like 4 times a day.
So wait, you dealt with that by sort of answering their questions, by providing them what they asked for, even though you knew what the answer was going to be.
Yeah.
Did this go on for the entire editing process, or at a certain point did they go, we trust her now?
Pretty much the entire editing process. And in fact, the executive producer, who was the one that had hired me, she was a friend of mine. I'd worked with her many times. She's like, you know, you have to have you on the show. She apologized and like went and hid in her office because she didn't want to deal with it. I'm like, she could escape, I couldn't. So I just, had to be very polite because these are the network executives that it's like, we don't have that shot here. And so it was on me that we didn't have the shot in their minds. So you just have to be like, sorry,
There's a whole host of pain in what you've just said from many sides.
Yes.
Sidney, you've done scripted, so you must have reached a point where that a director remembers very specifically having a shot that in fact doesn't exist, but they remember having shot because it was in rehearsal, whatever.
Sure, that's occurred. And then you always get the question, is this the best take? Or is this the best shot? And, it's like...
What do you answer to that?
I say, I think it is, but let's have a look at all the other coverage and see if there might be something better. I mean, that's what I say. I mean, and often there is. I can't, my decisions aren't perfect. I make a decision based on some circumstances at the time when I'm doing it, or I'm picking a shot that was specifically flagged as the director's favorite. But editing is sort of an evolutionary process. So I'm always happy to look through everything, and sometimes you see things that are better or spark other ideas, and you can go from there.
So, I've often had that, are you sure that's the best one? Did you choose the best one?
Right.
At a certain point during the editing process, when I can't take it anymore, I've actually said, no, I intentionally chose the worst one.
Well, I
Of
definitely-
course
I
I chose
definitely
what I
thought
thought was the
that,
best
yeah.
one. Let's find out what you think is the best
Yeah.
one. So, what about you? What did
Well,
you?
I think working in reality TV, all of those 4 categories you mentioned, we hit that daily, all 4, all day. I just think reality TV is a disaster in and of itself. And so like speaking to, like, what were your 4 categories? What was the first one?
Yeah, so there were deadline, personnel, equipment, and scripted material.
Yeah, so scripted material, good Lord, in reality, you pray to God you have a shot, let alone a story. So I think the disaster just comes from, with the footage, you can do so much. You typically have about 200 hours per episode of footage to work with. And so execs, a lot of times, they want a certain scene to be a certain way. They're like, okay, they need to accomplish this, and we want it to be, funny. So you're like, okay, you edit it, and it's funny. And then they watch it, and they're like, no, let's make them sad or mad. And it's the same footage, but you have to retool it a completely different way because you have that flexibility. And the deadline didn't change. When it's due didn't change. None of that changed, but double the work happened to you. And so they're the execs. You have to give them what you want. I can't say, no, I can't give you a sad scene. I just have to go back to the footage and deal with it and try to figure it out, kind of thing. And that's daily. They think they want a scene a certain way, then they see it, and they know they can change their mind, and then you're stuck trying to give them what they want.
So does that change, you talked about pilots, in pilots you're looking for the tone. Does that change as you go through a season? Does it get easier for you to figure out what they want?
You would think.
Or for them to figure out?
You would think that at
Yeah.
some point the execs would turn out, usually by season 3, they kind of understand what they want.
That's a long haul.
Yes. The first seasons of every show are notorious, awful. There's always characters in reality TV. You got to figure out who the villain is. You got to figure out the good guy, the hero. But you don't know when you're shooting because they don't, they just don't know that kind of stuff yet. It's not scripted. And so they think they know who they want the villain to be, but as they shoot for their episodes, they realize, oh, it's going this direction. So let's change the first 5 episodes to match what they just shot. And so you think you're going totally fine, and that stuff's in the can and stuff's done, and then some magical thing happened on set, and then they want to change the prior episodes just to lead up to whatever they just shot, And so it just gets a little crazy because they don't hire more people. They didn't change the deadline. They still want what they want. And so you just end up retooling the same footage 1,000 times.
So sounds like there might be some stress involved in this.
Yes.
So we have a question from Twitter, which is, how do you cope with that stress? What are some mechanisms that all 3 of you have discovered to help not have the top of your head blow up continually?
I actually bring a kettlebell to work and work out when I need a moment. Thankfully editors have their own bays. We can lock our doors. It's not a cubicle situation. So I just lock my door, take 2 minutes, do what I need to do. But it's, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if I handle stress well or not. I don't know, I can easily calm myself. I don't get into screaming matches, but I let other people get into screaming matches. And then I just sit there until they're done and then do whatever the decision was.
Spectator sport.
Yeah.
So what about you, Jen?
Up until about a year or 2 ago, I would run marathons. That would get my stress out, running marathons. One thing I do like at work, and this depends on who, like when I get notes emailed, depends on who the email goes to in response, because I'll get real sarcastic in my responses. Like you said, oh, is this the best shot? It's like, oh no, I didn't use the best shot. Or, can we show so-and-so doing this? Well, if you get in your, TARDIS and go back and shoot it, you can. You get sarcastic, you just kind of let out steam in little ways. But usually, if the executives are going to get those notes, you don't do that. You just like verbally talk it out with the other editors, and, you just,
I think it depends on
have
how
sessions
long you
like
work
this.
with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
If you know people well enough, you've worked with them for a long time, you know how they need to deal with their stress, and so you just know how to work with certain people. There's people you don't know how to work with. It's the first time you're working with, but you don't know how they're going to react to either your humor, your anger, your non-responsiveness. You don't know. So that's what makes it more difficult when you haven't worked with people for a while.
What about you, Sidney? How do you deal with it?
I try to make sure that I take lunch at a certain time by 1 o'clock, and I try
That's
to
my
go-
exercise.
That's right. Well, really, because, it sort of builds up, all morning. And if you don't have like something, at least a moment where you can stop for a while. And try to take a walk in the afternoon. And then if it's like a pilot and you're working I worked like 30 or 33 days straight, and they want you to work into the evening, make sure that dinner gets organized. Because often I'm the only person thinking about it. And if you don't watch it, it's like 6 o'clock and 6:30, and nobody, even the post-producer, hasn't even thought about getting dinner. And it's like, okay, we'll order it now, but that means it won't get here till 8. And so that's what I try to do. But pilots are definitely, especially network pilots, when it has to be done by like May for the upfronts, and you look at those schedules in the beginning, and every day is scheduled, literally every day, every Saturday and Sunday. And it's like the second Sunday or third Sunday, you're walking onto the lot and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm here again. And those pilots, when you never get a day off, get pretty ragged. And it gets harder and harder to deal with, all the pressure. But you just have to kind of find it in yourself and realize that basically none of it matters. You're there to help these people do whatever they want to do, and you try to do it as calmly as you can and show them what they want and contribute to it. So that's sort of how I handle it.
Mm-hmm. So, there is a consistency here among getting some time to think, time for yourself, but also some kind of physical activity that takes you out of the room and does that for a while. Are there jobs that maybe you won't take because they're going to be like a, can I say this, a shit show? Or do you, how do you kind of make those choices? So Sidney, for instance.
Well, sometimes you don't even know, you
Right.
take the job and then you get in and you look at the schedule. For a pilot, you pretty much know, but I know one show where I looked at the schedule, it was a movie of the week, and it was like, really, Saturday and Sunday, and the whole thing? And they said, oh yeah, it has to be on the air on April, starting in January, it has to be on April 4th or something. So we have to work every day. And I thought, oh my God. But I don't think I would turn down a job because of a schedule. I might, I guess. A lot of factors would have to be weighed.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the people? Might you turn down a job because you aren't comfortable with the people? You've heard stories about them, or you've worked with them before and whatever.
I don't know. I found that people, I have not turned a job down because of people, but I've worked with people whose reputation was they're really hard to work with, and I found them to be fine in the cutting room. My theory is that directors sometimes when they're on the set or they're under stress or, they're a different animal than when they get in the cutting room, when they can kind of just focus on the material.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never turned anything down because of the people. How about you, Jen?
I had a couple of instances where one was the production company and one was a particular producer, and I don't turn the job down. I just quote a rate that's really outrageously high.
Same
don't
thing,
turn me
right?
down, yeah. And the one time it worked. The other time they said, okay. I was like, oh crap. But then the show got canceled before it even started. Like the producer called me up and said, yeah, so I get to work today and find out the show's not gonna happen. So, but what sucked about that is it was supposed to be an 8-month-long gig. And so I had turned down other work thinking I was gonna have this 8 months at,
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of dollars more a week than I normally make to make up for having to work with this particular producer. And so then I had to kind of scramble and find other work, but I was able to find other work very easily. I try never to turn a job down. You just make it very expensive for them to hire you.
I think it depends too where you're at in your career. Like early on, you're probably not turning many jobs down. You're probably starving for gigs. So you just kind of suck it up and deal with those people. I think now I'm at a point in my career I would turn jobs down because you just work with certain people and you're like, I never want to work with them again, kind of a thing. It might just have been that one show at that one moment in time. But you get kind of the point, I think in reality TV too, since you don't have the power of the union behind you. And so I've quit jobs when, you're supposed to work, a 10-hour day-ish. And they start pushing you to 12, 15-hour days, but no overtime, no nothing. They want Saturdays with no extra pay, all this kind of stuff. I think early on in your career, you're willing to give them that time because you're just trying to build up a resume of some sort. But the more you work and the more you realize they are just literally taking advantage of you. Like, it doesn't help your career at all to work those extra hours. They're not giving you brownie points. They're not doing anything. They're just taking full-on advantage. So I've gotten to the point now, if I see a gig going that direction or they start asking for so many hours outside of pay, then I'll just say, no, I'm not working it. And if that turns into, now we don't want you editing, then bye.
I worked many years ago on a network, like an ABC documentary, and it was not union. And I made a deal, and I said, look, all I want is after 12 hours, I get overtime, and or double time or whatever. And there was a woman on another editor, and she didn't have that deal. And literally, there were times they sent me home like at 2 a.m. because I was going into, or whatever it was, midnight. She worked literally 24 hours. My assistant, I think, who didn't have any deal, worked like, even more than that. I mean, it was one of these things where there was a air date. But this other gal, I mean, I felt really bad for her, but they just worked her all night, and it was pretty bleak.
At some point, you gotta put your foot down a little
I
bit.
think the union has organized some
Yeah.
reality shows.
They're getting there.
Yeah.
But I think too, just the way reality TV is going, you can step up a little bit more and fight it a little bit. Or maybe that's just me now that I'm older.
Well, no, I think we do.
Yeah, I'm willing to
We
fight
do
now.
struggle during a lot of our career to get to a place where we can make choices.
Yeah.
So once we can start to do that, we can weigh in on that. Before we move into other categories of disasters, I do want to make sure that we talk about something, we were talking about this outside before. Do you find anything more problematic as a woman in the business than you think perhaps someone like myself would have countered that make these decisions harder?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nothing as bad as Harvey Weinstein, but I think I have known, I started it.
That's right.
I have noticed, so even today, even yesterday, and almost every day, when you question something, whether it's an edit or storyline or anything, or you just say something's not working, like yesterday I couldn't render anything. Eva just wouldn't render anything. And so they're like, why isn't this done yet? Why isn't this done yet? I have to prove. I can't just say, whatever the reason is for something, I have to prove it. So if I'm like, hey, I'm behind because of X, Y, and Z, I have to show them X, Y, and Z. Whereas, I'm the only female on the show I'm on. So all the other guys, if they said, it's just not working, it's like, oh, it's not working. So it's little things like that you tend to have to prove with extra steps to be believed, kind of a thing.
I've run into a couple situations where I've always been a very fast editor. I mean, I started my career working on a daily talk show that we had to get an episode done a day. So I've just always been very fast. And I was hired to do this one show. It wasn't a pilot, but it was kind of a pilot. It was 16 episodes, test episodes that were going to air in like 15 markets in, a 3-week period. And we had the first show taped on Monday and aired Tuesday afternoon. And the first episode was like an hour and a half heavy. Over what it was supposed to be.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be 45 minutes and it was like 2 hours. And they were using Final Cut Pro and trying to group all the cameras.
So how do you feel? No, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about equipment in a moment.
Yeah. And so like the equipment wasn't sufficient. They had one computer to capture all of the footage, and I was supposed to come in at like 1 o'clock and start editing, and they didn't even have the footage in the computer for the for the, if I finally told him, just get the line cut in, I will cut it down, and then where I need ISOs, we will capture just the ISOs where I need them. And so I spent like 20 hours editing this episode and got it done, ready to air, just in time to turn around and do Wednesday's episode. So like they got me a hotel room and I slept for 4 hours and came back and started editing Wednesday's show. And so like this was like a week and a half long process where I would have like sleep for 4 hours, go edit for 12, sleep for 4 hours, edit for 12. And like, I don't know if it was because I was a woman or what, but the money guy is like, why aren't these getting done faster? Why aren't these getting done? Why is it taking so long to edit these episodes? And the guy that was my post super like told me afterwards, he went in and had an argument, said no other editor I know could get this done in your deadline. And it's like, I got every episode on the air, some of them with only a few minutes notice, but I feel like this guy was like, thinking a guy could cut it faster. And I was like,
So how do you deal with
Yeah,
this,
you gotta
and what are
find that-
solutions?
For me, you always gotta find that one person you work with, if it's a post super or whatever, that can have your back. And you just gotta make friends with them and get them on your side. Because you do need someone else to defend you. You just need that extra male voice.
So to broaden the topic here, I would say that that's really by extension true for anyone breaking in or anyone. At a certain point, you find your mentors, you find the people who will go to bat for you, and those aren't easy to find.
No, they're not.
Easy to find. Well, so you had mentioned export problems, right?
Any problem.
You had mentioned, I don't get broke. So this feels like a better segue than I normally make into talking about equipment issues. And there could be small equipment issues, big equipment issues, or disaster equipment issues in different ways. So why don't you talk about, I don't know, if you've had any problems recently, let's say.
Yeah, well, I couldn't render today.
Uh-huh.
And we're a daily show, so it's gotta go out by 4 o'clock. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we've all had equipment issues at some point or another. Thankfully, we do have staff tech support, also a good person to become friends with, so they don't get annoyed when you ask them things. But I think it comes back to deadlines when you talk about equipment failure, because, I mean, the equipment's gonna fail, for the most part, you shut down, restart, and it's magically fixed. But they just get you behind, and then people get on you and on your back of why isn't this done yet, why isn't this done yet? And, when it's a tech issue, nobody, exec-wise, knows what to do with that, because they don't know the software at all. So it freaks them out, I think, a lot more than when it's a creative issue story they can figure out and try to help. But when it's a tech issue, you just gotta go hands off for a little bit and try to troubleshoot. So like with the rendering issue, like a simple error of being not able to render, the only fix for that is to go to each individual clip one by one and figure out where's the bad render. And it's just time consuming. There's nothing else you could do. And so again, even tech support can't make it go faster. We're just all going clip by clip until you find the bad one. And so
The crimes happened the day before, so you have to.
Yeah, right.
No, but seriously.
Crimes happen every
No,
day.
but I'm serious. I'm
Yeah.
curious why you wouldn't be cutting a show on Monday for Thursday or something like that.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to. That's how
I
it's
see.
supposed to be. But they try to be 2 days out. But the execs now think because it's 2 days out, they have 2 extra days to go back and fix things. But a good exec that really hones in on the story quickly in post, man, it's just those kind of shows are so nice and easy to do. But when the execs really have so much time and options and they don't know what they want to do, it just
Well,
makes everything stressful.
there's no doubt that the work will expand to fill the time available, regardless of that. I've certainly found that even unscripted, where one of my issues has to do with directors who know precisely what they want,
Yeah.
right? Regardless of what the footage is doing, they know precisely what they want. So both sides have real, and this may be more in the personnel and the materials kind of stuff rather than equipment, but yeah, it has to do with expectations and, as you say, stress.
Yeah.
Build-up of stress. So are there any other sort of equipment issues?
I think just kind of going back to the whole software thing, it's not using the right tool for the job. Like I mentioned, that particular show that I was on, they were using Final Cut Pro, and it wasn't the right tool because they didn't have the right setup. They were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. There was another pilot I worked on where, again, it was Final Cut Pro, and
That's a coincidence.
yeah, coincidence. But well, I think and it's not that because Final Cut Pro sucks. It's because they're not using it in the proper way. I mean, because it has its place. A multi-camera shoot where everything's grouped is not, and 5 editors are working on the show, is not the place to use Final Cut Pro. We go in and the other editor found out that it was Final Cut Pro when we came to watch the shoot, and I mentioned it to him, and he's like, I don't know Final Cut Pro. So I'm like, here, go get this book. I taught myself Final Cut Pro in a weekend. You can do it. If you know Avid, you can figure out Final Cut Pro, and I'll be here to answer questions. Well, so we get into the edit bay, and every 5 minutes, without fail, both of our computers crashed. And we couldn't figure it out. We're
That
like,
never happens
yeah,
on Avid, by the way.
yeah. Well, no, Avid, it takes 10 minutes. Avid, it takes 10. But like it was like
Exception
you
error.
could set a stopwatch by how often this would, and we're like, there's something wrong here. This is crashing like every 7 minutes or whatever it was. And they're like, oh, it's because you guys are Avid editors, so you're editing like Avid editors. And I'm like,
Right.
right, yeah. It's like, no, it's because there's something going on with this. And then I talked to a friend of mine who she's done features on Final Cut Pro. She's like, well, explain to me what it is. I'm like, well, it's like a 7-camera shoot, and they have, and she's like, do they have all the audio grouped together? And I'm like, yeah, there was like 84 tracks of audio grouped together. I'm like, that's why it's crashing. And because they grouped the audio improperly. And so they were blaming the editors because they couldn't admit that using Final Cut Pro was their mistake, because they just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars switching their entire facility over to Final Cut Pro. So it couldn't be the software, it had to be the editors. And like the other editor, they let him go like at the end of the first week because he was editing like an Avid editor and wasn't getting done. I mean, that particular production had other issues, like personnel issues too.
So, but how do you deal with those sorts of issues then?
Save a lot. Save a lot. And once I knew what the kind of issue was, then I went back to the source and didn't use the groups. I just cut from the source and cut the audio in as I needed. So, I mean, it added time to my edit, but I'm like, well, they won't believe me that these are corrupt sequences, so I'm not gonna use them. I'm just gonna find a way around it. So it's just their inability to believe that they were using the wrong tools for the job is what caused the issues there.
That reminds me of a gig. I got called into a gig, a certain post house, I won't name names, was a Final Cut house. And on Friday, they ripped all the Final Cuts out and put Avids in on Monday morning and didn't tell the editors. And so the editors came on Monday morning, and they're Final Cut editors. I think it's a lot easier if you know Avid to go to Final Cut than the other way around. And they were lost. So their shows got way behind on their deadlines because they honestly, and this poor assistant editors really had no idea how to do anything, let alone just get a clip in. And so a bunch of us Avid editors got called over there to obviously just keep their deadlines so they didn't fall way behind, which they already were. And we had to set up a whole process for their assistant editors, write every little step down, which isn't my job at all. I mean, at least I was an assistant editor at one point, so I did know how to do all that stuff. But it was mind-boggling that somebody on a Friday would change it all out over the weekend and expect on Monday for everything to just be smooth. It was mind-boggling.
Right. So you bring up a really great issue here, which has to do with the software meshing with the editor as well. So we're being asked to do far more things in the editing room than 100 years ago, thank you, Terry, when I started, where it was, hey, made cuts, 35 millimeter, the end, done. You couldn't find some of the frames, but never mind that. We're being asked to do more and more now, some of which might be out of our skill set. So have you run across issues where a producer or a director who has worked with other editors before go, hey, well, they were able to put it into Maya and then come back, and how come you can't do that?
I think especially on the type of show I work on currently, where there's 5 different editors right now and 5 different skill sets. There's certain times where we'll need to paint something out, or there's certain things that we need to do that are outside of the ordinary. that then when the same issue comes up in another show, they're like, well, so-and-so did it 2 months ago. And it's like, well, but it wasn't the exact same thing. Like that shot was a static shot and like we had what we needed to, cover what we were covering. And this, it's not, it's kind of the same, but there's different things that are different with it that make it not possible. So like they get in their head, well, so-and-so did it 6 months ago, why can't you do it now?
So you're talking about communication between yourself and the producer or director saying this is what's possible and what's not.
Right.
Any issues there? I'm sure you have the same thing as well.
Well, I have the luxury of having had assistants who are really good with VFX. So, I mean, I can do some things, and I also know what can be done, even though I couldn't really do it or couldn't do it fast enough if I'm sitting with a director. But I can always call in my assistant and say, this is what we need to do. Do you think we can do it? And he or she will say, yeah, no problem. And I'll say, well, to the director, we'll have my assistant will work on this while we move forward, and then when he's ready, we'll put it in the show. That's the way I handle it.
I think, though, it's kind of a good thing, too, to have so many hats as an editor. Not that you need to wear all of them, but, so I've worked on a ton of paranormal shows, which is effect heavy, and I'm known as fast as well, so it's like I got good at effects and I'm fast, so yay, I work on those shows. But I think it can also set you apart as an editor. Like if you're really good at music, it's good to be known as somebody who's really good at music, and then it shows that are music heavy will find you and want you on their show. So if you're not good at effects, not all shows need effects. So it's good to, you don't have to know everything. There's shows out there for your skill set. So if you want to be known as the music guy, great. If you want to be known as someone who really knows effects, there's a lot of effects, especially right now, that they want you for. If you're just good with story, that's always a skill set that's not going away. Or you're known as fast, or it's okay to be known, I think, as a bunch of different types of editing. You'll find a show that fits your skill set. And even on our show, it's effect heavy, and people have been let go on the show that can't keep up. And so it's one of those, you try it out and you realize, wow, I do not like effects. I don't want to deal with this. So, okay, this show's just not for you. And that's fine. There's other shows out there.
And I was kind of building off that one issue, and I know some of you are probably out there looking for jobs. There's a, you get known for one thing, and they think that because you edit studio shows, you can't edit reality shows. Or because you edit scripted, you can't edit a courtroom show or something. And I think that, yes, you do get to a niche where you discover what kinds of shows you like. But I think sometimes there's a problem with, when people are hiring, that they focus too much on, oh, you've done this type of show, you can't do this one.
That's true, it's scripted as well. You get pigeonholed as your comedy or action, feature or television. I've even heard people now, they're either cable or network editors. It's and it's really all the same stuff, but you're always fighting that.
So we're talking about here experience in something, whether it's a type of, whether it's a genre, or whether it's a piece of software, or even new elements of existing software. How can we keep up with that stuff? How is it possible? How do you keep yourself familiar with all the stuff that you need to do for VFX, or all the stuff you need to do for music, or whatever? How do you keep up?
You learn what you need to learn.
Yeah.
But how? When you're in the
There's a
trenches?
time I was cutting on film and I couldn't get a job because people were cutting in the montage. So I went and learned the montage, which probably nobody's cut on. And then there was a time when I couldn't.
Cut on the montage.
You cut on the montage. I couldn't find a montage to cut on. So I had a friend, Steve Cohen, who was cutting on an Avid at home, and I found a place with an Avid. And since then, I've pretty much cut on Avid except for a couple of Final Cut shows, which I was not that wild about the first time. And the second time, it was the condition of the job, and I said, fine, and did it.
Welcome to Dump on Apple. Here we are.
Yeah.
So let's now take a few steps backward. So you're talking about the skill set that you need for the kinds of shows you do. You were talking about skill set that you need. You were talking about having good assistants, right? Or having skill set of hiring
Fine.
assistants.
That is a skill.
It's, or learning new technology that comes along. What about people who are just starting out? What's a, in your opinion, baseline set of skills that they need in order to survive in an
Editing or
editing?
just starting like as an assistant? Like,
Starting,
trying to get in or
starting, breaking in.
I think nowadays the tech side of just as an assistant editor, it's so tech heavy now of just getting stuff in, grouping it, and getting out.
But
Yeah,
you
you
need
just
it,
gotta
but
get
you need
in.
to know Avid, I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
and-
that's the platform.
definitely
You
have to know the
that.
software.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I was gonna say, I've always said that calling our assistant editors is really a misnomer. They're not assisting me. They're not, getting my coffee and prepping my sequences. I really think that our assistant editors should be called technical editors. Like you said, they do the tech stuff. I don't know, like 17 years ago when I first started on the Jenny Jones show, we didn't have assistant editors. We did it all ourselves. We had AV/VB drives. We had 2 Avids and an AV tape room, and I was the only editor who knew both rooms. And so I would get called in to do a lot of the stuff because we had one editor who could only do at that time it was called the online room, and 2 editors who could do the Avid, and then I could do both. And so knowing both was a great skill set for me because it kept me employed during the summer when everybody else got to go on hiatus. But I think that our assistant editors really are less assistant editors and more technical editors.
Mhm.
We have a couple assistant editors who want to move up to editor, but we have a couple that are just happy doing, outputs and capturing and grouping. And I think that it's sort of going back to what you were saying about people who are just starting out in business, learn as much as you can. And don't just learn editing, learn production. Learn what the director's doing, learn what the cameramen are doing, learn not just editing, but just production as a whole.
Mhm.
Because that's gonna make you a better editor.
Good advertisement for film school, thank you.
Like, I think, the best way, I can just tell you how I broke into the industry. I'm from the Midwest, and I took a class on Avid just to learn it. I didn't go to college or anything like that, so I just started doing commercials and stuff in the Midwest. And when I moved out here, they don't care about any of your credits that you did anywhere else but LA. But thankfully, I went and got an Avid teaching certification, so I started teaching it just to have a job in LA, because I couldn't find work. I had moved out here knowing nobody. I had no contacts, no networking, nothing. So I started teaching it, and I've been teaching it up until like a year or 2 ago. So that kept all my basics. I remember the assistant editing stuff because I've taught it for 15 years. So I never will forget that kind of stuff. I don't know if this is good advice or bad advice, but the way I started was I lied and I said I was an assistant editor, and I took a job that I was not qualified for, but I also knew my level. I'm the type that says yes and figures it out. Some people are not that type. So if you know you're not that type, it's probably not a good thing to do. And so I took an assistant editing gig, and literally day 1, hour 1 was to do an output to tape. And I had never touched a deck in my life. Never saw a deck, never done anything with it. And I was like, okay.
So how'd that go for you?
Not great. But like, again, you don't want to tell people you don't know how to do something
Right.
when you're starting out. Like nowadays, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. But back then, you're just nervous. You don't know what to do. You don't want the exec to find out. And it was on a show with celebrities. It's like they're standing right there in the hallway. You're like, man, I don't want to throw this out there. And I looked out the window, and I was on like the 3rd floor. I looked out the window. The window happened to be cracked open, and I saw a guy wearing an Avid shirt. And I was like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And he happened to be a tech. He just happened to be Avid tech support that was on somewhere else on the lot. And thankfully he came up, and I was like, I have a few questions. And he did it. He did the whole, he was like, I see what you're doing. So he did the whole thing for me. I watched him. I wrote everything down. Never forgot how to output to tape again. Because I think when that stress is on you, you never forget whatever you just learned. And so to me, when you're starting out, nowadays I think the software is so tech heavy, you almost do have to take a class. I don't think Avid's something you can just learn at home. The assistant stuff. editing, maybe. So if you know nothing, go get a basic skill set. And I even tell people in the classes, just go get a job. The most you're gonna learn is when you're in the fire and you're just there and you have no other choice but to do it. I think that's really the only way you're gonna learn. So I tell people that like, oh, I'm gonna be a logger or I'm just gonna be post PA. I'm like, no, go for the assistant. If you have some of the tech knowledge, like if you have no knowledge, obviously you have to do some of that stuff. But they're not gonna take a logger and make them an assistant editor.
Right.
Because they've never seen you do it. Like it's two totally different jobs. So I say, just go for the job you want, say yes, and figure it out.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. And the same thing with editing. That's why I moved up to editor. I was like, oh yeah, I'm an editor. I've
You
edited a few
lie,
shows.
right?
I edited.
So this is, you are if you're editing, right? Since we're talking about assistants, I can volunteer one story that I had when I was editing that probably was, it felt like a disaster at the time, maybe it wasn't. In retrospect, when you think of the real disasters going on out there, let's put it in perspective. I had an assistant who, we were digitizing then, back in the old days, off of tape into the Avid. And at that point, it was one point about halfway through, we were like a 35-day shoot, about halfway in. He did something, I blocked out what it is now, and every single piece of media disappeared. So luckily we backed up projects, you don't back up media, we had the projects backed up, so we could get fine, but we had 17, 18 days worth of dailies to redigitize. So for a day or two, he was coming in at night, feeding me to do that, and I wasn't editing the stuff that I had been editing. And the thing about that for me was, the guy was a good guy. He was really good. In many places, he would be known as the ex-assistant editor the next day, but that I knew he would never, ever make that mistake again, whatever it was. So in terms of the mentorship that you do editor to assistant, some of it is just, okay, what'd you do wrong? Let's sit down and talk about it. By the way, I'm really pissed, but it's okay, let's figure that out. And use it as a learning experience, because otherwise, how will people learn? That's my feeling on it. So we're gonna take a break. How long is a break?
We'll be back at 8:30.
We'll be back at 8:30. I can't wait to see you back at 8:30. Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah.